Oh, hello now. Good evening to Radio Maria Ireland. So it's great to have your company now. 4 o'clock every Thursday, we have Father Luke Jansen on, a Dominican priest, for his show, The Light of Truth. So again, it's great to have Father Luke on, and he loves to hear from everyone texting in. So please do text in if you have any question that you'd like to ask Father Luke. Any reflection, maybe also some feedback. We'd love to hear some feedback. We'll pass it on to Father Luke. So if you want to send in some feedback, any questions, comments, even a song request, I'm sure Father Luke will do his best to accommodate that next week. So again, I'll just give you the number if you'd like to text in. It's 089 467 2000. That's 089 467 2000. You can email info@radiomaria.ie. That's info@radiomaria.ie. Or give us a call here, 014 123 456. Very easy number to remember, 014 123 456. So if you want to text in, again, if you're listening back to a repeat or a podcast of this show, please do get in touch and we'll pass on the message to Father Luke. So now I hand you over now to Father Luke Jansen.
Thank you very much, and very welcome to the Light of Truth. Indeed, as Aidan said there, I love to have feedback, and I think I only get the positive feedback fed back to me. So that's always great, you know. It can be good, I suppose. Also, it gives, of course, any questions and stuff gives also something to talk about and to broaden the subject a little bit. Yesterday in our prayer meeting here in Cork, we were talking a little bit about the Bible, as we did a little bit of study of the passage of the prodigal son. And one of the things that really strikes me about the Bible is that there is no way to really read the scriptures, especially the New Testament. I find we can open up the scriptures and we can read it as the stories as they appear on the page, and we can read the parables and on face value, as we would read any book, I suppose, to a certain extent. But once we open our hearts, the way it speaks to us is different, and the way it connects to our life is different each time and for each person. So what opens up for you is different than what opens up for me. But by sharing that, sometimes it is very fruitful to kind of see how these different things work for different people and how they connect together. At the end of the day, we are one body of Christ, and we are to a certain extent connected that way. It is not a journey we walk alone, even that our own personal relationship with God is important, and our personal prayer and a personal nourishment by the scriptures. It is also something that we should do in common, to allow God to work through others. I mean, that is one of the ways the Spirit works most of the time, I think, is through normal circumstances. Normal people we meet, ourselves being included. He works to us in the people we meet at different times, and also in revelation and in guiding us along the path. Most of the time, these things are quite natural, quite normal, a part of our daily lives. So, do share with each other, share with me and on the show, but also do share with each other if you pray together with people, if you study the Bible together with people, in all these kind of circumstances, because that is really fruitful. And most of the time, an open heart is the only thing we really know we need to have. So I just continue for the time being with the Gospel according to John, and I did the first 13 verses of the first chapter last week. So we're going to continue now with the Gospel according to John, chapter 1 and verse 14. And the Word became flesh and dwelt amongst us, full of grace and truth. We have beheld his glory as of the only Son from the Father. John bore witness to him and cried, "This was he of whom I said, He who comes after me ranks before me, for he was before me." and from his fullness we all receive grace upon grace. For the law was given to Moses, grace and truth came to Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the only Son, who is in the bosom of the Father. He has made him known. So that continues a little bit on the Word that became flesh. So the Word that created everything, as I mentioned last time, the Logos that created everything, became flesh and dwelt amongst us. Jesus was born into this world. God became part of the world. This amazing feat that is really mind-blowing to kind of think of it, that the people at the time, the first apostles, those who are going to read about in a short while, that how God really stepped into their lives. Now he still does the same for us in various ways, directly and indirectly, but at that time that God became man and dwelt amongst us is just something amazing to think of. And the reason he did that was because of you and me, of course, because of the people then, but every individual on themselves. Living a hidden life of 30 years approximately, he then stepped into the public sphere to proclaim the gospel, but also to go and give himself as a ransom for many, as we say in the Mass, to give us a ransom for many and to be sacrificed himself for our sins so we can become children of God. So the Word became flesh and dwelt amongst us, full of grace and truth. And of course, God is full of grace and truth because God is truth and God is grace. I mean, there's probably different direct interpretations we can use for grace, but as Father John Harris always taught me, or one of the definitions he used in class, that it is the participation in the inner life of the Trinity. And of course, Jesus is the inner life of the Trinity with the Father and the Son. So grace is really the touch of the divine in our lives, I suppose. It's a word, I think, that it's good to think about, maybe, or maybe it's not necessary, but personally, it's a word for me. It has this specific meaning. Grace is really the divine element. But maybe that is not so for everybody. And the reason I say that is that if I think of the Dutch word, and naturally I not being brought up in a Catholic or even a Christian kind of way, not having known anything about theology, the Dutch word for grace wouldn't have any relation with me, for me, to the divine. It would mean like the grace a king would give. So it's more of a legal thing, I suppose, or legal thing like if somebody has done something, but by the grace of the king he was let free. In that kind of way. So it is more of a free gift kind of it, what grace of course is, but without supernatural kind of element to it. For me in English, because I learned the word grace when I converted, and I wouldn't have really used it before that, I suppose, it has automatically the annotation and the relation and the link with God. For me it's really a religious word, but that is not for everybody. So it's good to kind of sometimes think about the words that we use and the significance that they have, that it isn't always a given, that it is clear what the real meaning is in the context of our faith. So grace is really God himself coming towards us and touching us to a certain extent. So the Word became flesh and dwelt amongst us, full of grace and truth. Well, it is grace and truth that God is. We have beheld his glory as of the only Son from the Father. So the glory of Jesus was beheld by John. And John, the evangelist, who wrote the gospel, naturally writing this towards the end of his life, well, presumably writing this towards the end of his life, as far as I know, would have really felt it that way, that it is really like, I mean, as we will see, John's gospel is very spiritual, very deep. So it is really a gospel that gets us to think deeply about things and about theology, and it sees that John has really pondered these mysteries. The book of Revelation is really an account, I suppose, of him touching the divine to a certain extent. I mean, getting the visions of which we find in Revelation. So he would have been very spiritual, and possibly, especially towards the end, reflecting on all these things. Doesn't always mean that we perceive them that way when they happen. That's why it's good to reflect back. Sometimes we can go through events and we don't really realize the spiritual significance of them. But then when we reflect back on them, then we kind of really see like how God was working in certain things, in certain situations, that God was really there all the time, helping us and showing us and helping us and guiding us in a way that we didn't realize. Like I said, a lot of the times possibly naturally. I would always look back on my own life and see the fact that I'm sitting here now is a miracle in itself. Coming like from, well, it's only 1,000 kilometers or whatever it is, 1,200 kilometers away, but having no intention to go abroad, having no intention of even believing in God, didn't know anything about God, to actually talking about the love of God and how His grace can come into somebody's life, is quite a turnaround. And if I look at it and I see like, yes, I mean, I never settled down as such. I mean, I didn't have a fixed relationship when I left, so I was free to leave. I came to Ireland. I was led to a company where I was then employed, where I then met the guy who converted me because I started a scholarship there. So there's a lot of things that happened, and since as well. But I mean, you can kind of see how God's hand is in these things, even at the time we obviously don't realize it. When I came to Ireland, I had no notion of what was happening, but I'm sure God knew it all already. So God's grace works in our life all the time. It touches us and it moves us all the time. But it is really kind of subtle. A subtle presence that helps us to kind of walk and nudges us towards the way that the Lord has traced out for us in our lives. So I think we go to our first break on that one. So the first one will be Nothing I Hold On To from Will Regan.
Oh, that was Nothing I Hold On To by Will Regan. So this is Radio Maria Ireland. You're listening here to Father Luuk Jansen and his show The Light of Truth. So it's live every Thursday from 4 to 5. So do spread the word. Also as well, get in touch with Father Luuk. He'd love to hear from you. A few messages in there. The first one is, Hi Father Luuk, great to hear you back on air today. I've just recently started praying and deeply meditating on the Angelus. I find it amazing how when I prayed the Angelus with my grandmother as a child, I was unaware of how powerful it is to reflect on the story of the Incarnation. Next one. Hi Father Luuk, I'm listening with interest to your discussion of St. Luke's Gospel. Thanks so much for all the insights you share. Another one. Hi Father, you mentioned how you felt God's hand in your decision to move to Ireland and your eventual conversion. Since you were unbelieving at that time, did you only realize God's intervention after the fact, i.e. when reflecting back on your life? Or did you always feel a presence of a supernatural being somewhere in the background? Thanks so much. Love the show. So now I'll pass you across to Father Luuk.
Okay, thank you very much and welcome Back to the Light of Truth. We just listened there to Nothing I Hold On To, Will Regan, or at least a part of the song. So the first one the first question I just really will answer is this continuation on what I said about how God's hand is in our lives. I'm not sure if I don't think I was ever aware of, like, when I came to Ireland, that was meant to be, but I would always have had a sense, I think, of the supernatural. I can remember that at times there would be a lot of programs on television about paranormal activity, hypnosis, or other ways of making people do things, or talking to spirits, or getting, all these kind of supernatural things, that some of them might be genuine and some might not. But I always believed that there was something like that there was something supernatural out there. I can remember there was, at one stage, there was a healer in the Netherlands, and she would heal people who come to the show. You could listen to it on the radio, but she always did something with water. Now I don't know, I can't remember how it was called or whatever, and I don't think it was a specific Christian. It could have been, but I don't think so. I wouldn't expect so. But the only thing I can remember is that if you put water in front of the radio, that it gave different colors, and she would explain on what the colors were meant and what the significance of them was, and you were supposed to drink the water. And I can remember doing that, and that we got white crystals into the water, and it was clean water, I'm sure of that. At one stage it didn't color, but we got crystals, which had a significance. It was one of the 5 options, I think, or something like that. So I was always kind of interested in it, maybe from a scientific point of view, to kind of figure these things out. But I always thought there was something, there was something more, especially also healing. I always had a sense that there was a possibility of healing and these kind of things. So that was always with me. So I did believe in that, but I wasn't aware of God as such directly, or what God's plan for me was, or something like that. So when I came to Ireland, I wouldn't have been aware of it, but that is on hindsight that you kind of think like, oh well, it seems that this is the way things were meant to be, and this is the way God kind of nudged me, and obviously, and I went along with it, and especially then when I opened my heart, of course, and decided to be Catholic and try to follow the Lord's will even more so. But yeah, it has to be an openness then to go to it and listen to it. And maybe this is a big question. As Father John, who did, like I said, I mentioned before, Father John Harris, who did teach us grace. The discussion we had a few times, and like, how does grace, like actual grace and prevenient grace, and the different ways God can interact on us, if we're baptized, if we're not baptized, even how could we experience that? How does it work? It's interesting to kind of know that. That God must even. Of course, everything is possible for God, but that God, to somebody who is not baptized, of course, God can nudge us on as well, to come towards Him, and to help us to open our hearts. And also, again, as I've mentioned now a few times this show already, is to the natural means, as the colleague of mine who had some impact on me in opening my heart to the possibility of God, but then also the people I met, to the prayer meeting I went to, and even some of them I still see occasionally. So there's various ways that God can work, but I was definitely not aware of it. But I was aware of something being present, or something working, but I didn't know how to listen to it. Not sure if I know how to listen to it now either, but at least I kind of have an idea of how God can speak to us. The actual practice of it is sometimes a little bit more difficult, as I'm sure many people would agree with. So yeah, no, I wouldn't have been aware that this was the way God planned it out, but it did seem to go. It did seem to be the way things were going, and I was just going with it. And maybe I did believe a little bit in predestination as well. I'm not 100% sure. I never really thought about that. So, and then the other one of the other comments was on the Angelus, and yes, I think it's great if we can enter into a prayer like that. Like, for example, the Angelus, because it's a prayer that at 6 o'clock or 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock during the day, that really gives us a minute or a little bit longer if we want to, but to actually just stop with everything we do. And I think it's actually a good discipline to do that. Not the best at it myself. Sometimes I think I just finish this and then I say the Angelus, and then 10 minutes later I might think, well, it's a little bit late now. But to actually, first of all, to take these moments, to actually just stop for a moment and to say a prayer, to bring that prayer into our lives, and also to a certain extent maybe to be a witness to that. We don't have to kind of stand up on our desks, however we are, stand up in classroom and make a big sign of the cross. But even people might notice these things, it's small little things, small little signs of what we believe in and what we stand for, but also because they bring us closer to God ourselves by just bringing Him in specifically and consciously in that moment of the day. And then you see, if we can get used to doing that, it's things we can do. We can do it throughout the day. The example I have often used is that I used to, when I was studying philosophy when walking alone, presumably most of the time. I would not necessarily pray when talking with others, but I mean when walking along the campus to the library to whatever place, to the train, just to have a small little rosary beads and start saying the rosary, and automatically that is something I had a habit for years. When traveling, when going somewhere, automatically I had the little rosary beads. I just took it in my hand automatically and start saying the rosary. It's a great habit to have. Sadly, I've lost it a bit since, but that's because I don't walk as much long distances, so it's not as automatic that it happens. But yes, no, it is great to bring prayer into our days at different times, and the Angelus is often a good one. I mean, we can set, most people have now an alarm clock or whatever, or phone, I suppose is an alarm clock, or set a reminder. Sometimes we can actually hear a church bell as well, to a church bell to notify us that it is that time, and that we should just put everything down for a moment, if we can, and say a little prayer. So just going to finish this this final little bit on chapter of verse 14 till 18 before we go into the story of John the Baptist himself. So say God is full of grace, of course, because God is grace, and His presence in our lives is the fullness of grace coming from Him towards us, especially now with after the Pentecost. With Pentecost, I suppose, the helper that has come, the Holy Spirit dwelling within us to guide us and help us, to give us that energy that we saw with the apostles. And from the fullness have we all received grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the only Son, who is in the bosom of the Father. He has made Him known. I think the contrast between Moses, who gave the law, and Jesus is great, and it is something. It's a good kind of topic to dwell on a little bit. So, what does the law mean? The law, I suppose, the commandments and everything that came with it, was there to make sure that the Israelites stayed on the straight and narrow, that they would not go after other gods, that they would live good and moral to a certain extent lives, be it a little bit primitive maybe, but giving basic commandments as you shall not kill, not commit adultery, not steal. Those things that are good for society, are good for good living. That is what God initially gave to Moses. Rules and regulations to kind of keep us, bring us into a right living, and make sure that we didn't go after other gods. Actually, that's just a little sidetrack there. When I was thinking about the woman who did the healings and with the water, like there's many other gods around at the time. Maybe there was more supernatural manifestations than nowadays, but there's many gods, and sometimes they can really be kind of hidden in different ways. It can be hidden in evil doesn't. I suppose if we consider that we have God and most of the other spirits, or we could say safely almost all other spirits, are evil spirits. So there would have been, I could see could be more manifestations in the past, maybe not so much now, but there's still kind of a lot of, it's still the same, even, but the ways in which we are tempted are maybe different. So for Moses, in a world where there were many gods, a lot of peoples, nations, I suppose, if you can speak of nations in a time, tribes, they would have their own gods, and they would have different gods or multiple gods even. And so to have one God like the Israelites did was something, I think, quite unique at the time, at least in the region. And the commandments are there to make sure that the people remained faithful to this one God. So it was really kind of a legalistic way of making people live in the right way. But then I suppose things changed. Things changed with the coming of Jesus, because now we are adopted sons and daughters of God through our brother Jesus, I suppose, and it's His grace, it's the grace of God, not necessarily His grace, but it's grace of God that now works in us and can transform us. So instead of rules and regulations, we don't need them anymore. To a certain extent, we don't need the commandments anymore. Well, we are unteachable, I suppose, to a certain extent, and we are sinful. We still have a fallen nature. We have our weakness of will, a darkening of the intellect. It is all there. So, I mean, we still need rules and regulations because naturally we are not good. A lot of us are not naturally as good as we should be. But to a certain extent, we should. Once we live the fullness of grace, we can become saints. And if we are saints, we don't need the law, we don't need the rules and regulations anymore as much. Or if we're really truly there, full of grace, I suppose as our Virgin Mother, the Virgin Mother Mary, the Mother of Jesus was, be a little bit different to the Immaculate Conception, but I mean, we don't have this desire or this temptation towards doing what is not good. Our wills are in right alignment with God's will. There's no contradiction, there's no tension there. We want to do good, we know what is good, we choose what is good. So we don't need the commandments. And I think that you can illustrate this by the fact that most people do not need the commandment that they shouldn't kill. Because I would hope that most people don't have a desire or to do this, to kill. They don't have a desire to break that commandment. So you don't really need the commandment anymore. Some of the other ones might be a little bit more of a struggle, but the more we grow in grace, the more we grow closer to God, the easier these things become, because our desires are not disorientated. They are not. They're not veering off and gone astray, but they are in the right direction. They are ordered towards God. So through grace, and I love grace. Well, I love grace. Yeah, I really love grace. But no, I love thinking about grace, how God can transform us from the inside through His grace once we participate and allow Him to do it. It's really the biggest gift that God has given us in this life. This transforming grace that really creates us into the image that He has made us in, the person He wants us to be. That if we participate and allow this to happen, it really changes us. Slowly, but it will change us. And if we keep at it, and the more we allow ourselves to let go of ourselves, I suppose, and allow God to be a center of our lives, the better it becomes. So that's grace to a certain extent opposed to the law. That Moses brought the law, which was the first stage, and I mean for some of us might still be the main stage, to have the rules and regulations, now coming to a certain extent to the church, I suppose, for us to live right and to help us to live better and to help us on the path and point us in the right direction. But then when we allow God to transform us, then these things become easy to do because they become natural for us to do to the habitual grace that is given us. And no one has ever seen God, the only Son, who is in the bosom of the Father. He has made Him known. So just a little point on that is that it is only through God that we know about God. It is through revelation that we know about God. We know about God being a Trinity because of Jesus having revealed this to us, and to certain parts in the prophets, I suppose, God has revealed things to us as well. A lot of these things we could not know because they're supernatural. And because they're supernatural, the only way we can know them is if they are revealed to us by God Himself. But that is exactly what He has done. To the prophets already shown us some parts of the way, but then He opened up completely and revealed Himself completely when Jesus came, because that was God Himself. The fullness of truth and grace, as it says, came to the world. So all the truth was revealed in Jesus Himself. And it is through what Jesus taught us and through His self-revelation that we know things about God, or we know the depth about God, what God is in itself. These things we cannot know by natural reason. Some things we can come to by natural reason, but it would take a lot of time and a lot of effort to do so. So by God revealing it, we have a sure source through our faith of that what we know about God. So it is Jesus Christ who has revealed God to us, revealed Himself, has revealed God to us in when He came, became flesh and dwelt amongst us, when He came and revealed Himself to those who walked with Him. And that's why we say that Revelation as such finished. It doesn't mean that we have finished unpacking it and understanding it with the death of the last apostle, because those who are the witnesses of Revelation itself, of God Himself, and they would have seen the fullness and the truth, as it says here in John's Gospel. So I think that is a little bit on grace and where we are standing compared to the law. And it is really Jesus who has fully revealed everything to us, for us to really be able to have a relationship with Christ, to understanding, to a certain extent, I suppose, in the terms of this world, of who He is. So the next song would be The Reckless Love from Corey Asbury.
Welcome back here to Radio Maria Ireland, your Catholic radio station. So it's Thursday evenings, and between 4 and 5 we have Father Luuk Jansen, who kindly joins us here for his show The Light of Truth. So please do get in touch with Father Luuk. He'd love to hear from you. So a couple of messages in, Father Luuk. One is there that, hi Father Luuk, you mentioned how the Angelus gives us opportunity to pause from the hectic pace of life. Just wondering whether you practice meditation, and also how else do you rest and replenish yourself in your busy life? Thanks so much. Love the show. Another message in, sending much appreciation to Father Luuk Janssen for all the insights into St. John's Gospel which he shared today. And last message in was from a listener speaking about the Angelus. It's great that on Radio Maria Ireland at 12 and at 6 there's a minute of bells before we recite the Angelus to help us enter into the mystery you spoke about. So now I'll pass you over to Father Luuk Janssen.
Okay, thank you very much. Welcome back. So, the Angelus, I suppose, is a great way of making a little bit of time for God in our busy lives. But we probably need to find a little bit more space. And I think it's personal to each person differently how they would do that in their lives. The question was, do I practice meditation? Well, we have at least half an hour meditation each day, which is we have to do as Dominicans. Here in St. Mary's in Cork, we do that from 5:30 at the moment to 6 o'clock as a community in the church. So we pray together, but quietly, silent, everybody for himself. We have quiet meditation. So what you do in that is up to yourself, I suppose. But it is good to have that silent time and a time of listening. So that is what I use it for most of the time. Personally, I try to add another 2 hours to that, although I must confess that is what I should be doing and don't always manage to actually practically do it. This really depends on the busyness of life. I tend to try and get up an hour before morning prayer, but sometimes, depending on my program, I celebrate Mass then as well, so that obviously takes a little bit of time from quiet meditation or even spiritual reading or reading of the Bible, but it's still a very good prayer, of course. And then in the evening the same, which doesn't always happen, but it is good, I think, to have a rhythm in the day. And I know for myself that for me to meditate, it is something that I better do in the morning to start off with, and then possibly again in the evening, because those are the times that I know I can reasonably easily make time. During the day, personally, I find it very difficult, but that's also because of my role here in St. Mary's. Involves a lot of practical work, and that makes it obviously difficult then to sometimes to be able to get that time, because if people call in or you have to make phone calls or whatever it is, can be a lot of disruptions. So yes, so it is important to make time and get a rhythm in our lives. And meditation, I think it is good to have quiet meditation, silent meditation, which can be which could even be meditation to rosary to a certain extent. I mean, just to allow a little bit of space out of the busyness of our minds, as well as having some spiritual reading. So that's very important too, and that is, I think, where I can notice how do you replenish during a busy life. That is what I should be doing, is making sure that time is there and doing some spiritual reading as well as quiet meditation. Sometimes when I personally am tired, I tend to do more quiet meditation because I'm just too tired. But it is very important that we do spiritual reading as well. Reading of the Bible, of course, but also some spiritual reading, because it gives us things to think about. And that is important too, that our minds are engaged with God as well as our I suppose as our souls, or whatever you want to say it, our inner life, that our minds are engaged as well, and that we kind of start to understand things better, because it usually brings us deeper into prayer and admiration of God. So spiritual reading can be very good too, and obviously that varies from very devotional, where we really take great example from the saints, as for example St. Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, did, or more technical theological works. Doesn't have to be a heavy theological study, which we don't have to do in the church. We can do it at desk as well. It can be prayer too, if we do it properly. But even to learn about theology, or like Cardinal Ratzinger or Pope Benedict XVI has written some beautiful books which are quite dense and deep, but are very prayerful at the same time and can really lead us into a deeper understanding and relationship with God. So it's very important to make time for these things. And for me personally, that time usually doesn't come spontaneous. Sadly, I would love to be able to say that at the moment, but I need to have to make time for it, and then engage with it, I suppose, and open myself up to it. So, yeah, that's really the answer, I suppose. But it is very important that we do, because if I talk about this grace and the change of life that can happen with when we allow the grace of God to work and that we don't need the law anymore, it's great in theory. Now, it is actually great in practice. I know it works, but does it actually mean that I practice it all the time? No, because I am selfish. I mean, I am fallen. I am making mistakes. I do choose what is not as good. I mean, that's like everybody else. In order to do this, we need to make sacrifices. Now, we need to make sacrifices in our life, I suppose, to do the right thing sometimes. We need sometimes to put up with things and difficulties. But I think the acceptance and things like that come with it when we do it, to the grace of God. But we also need to sacrifice time and make it a priority. And the simple, I suppose, comparison would be that if we have a friendship, and we don't really put much time of effort into this friendship, then it's not going to go anywhere. And this is the deepest friendship we can ever have with God. So it deserves a lot of time. And if we even kind of think how much time, a younger generation, I suppose, for example, would put into things like Facebook and WhatsApp and these kind of things to work on relationships. I mean, if we would spend that time with God, we're probably doing pretty well. And we probably would be doing quite well, even if it was what we with a person spends, we're doing quite well in on a journey to heaven, to holiness, to a grace-filled life, to allow the transformation to happen. But so often we're kind of lazy or I don't know. It doesn't appeal to us. And I suppose that's where it's important sometimes to maybe pray for the grace of desire to pray. I mean, that is can be very important too, that we have the desire to actually pray, that we feel all the time the desire to pray. And then if we want to make the time and effort, if something else comes up, it is less desirable, so we don't do it. Often, if prayer is difficult, especially when it is difficult, I mean, we think, okay, we should pray, but I just do this, or this just comes up, and then something else. And we don't really get to it. But if our desire is there to pray, then we will automatically choose what's the desire. And the desire will be stronger than other desires, I suppose, of other things we want to do. We automatically do it and do it right, and enter into it properly instead of half-hearted sometimes maybe when we go in and kind of think about other things while we are in prayer. So we should pray for the desire. We should always ask God things. I'm sure I've said it before, but it was something that really came to me during the summer. I'm not sure at the moment exactly how, but that's what was really strong came to me when I was in Lourdes, that we should ask for things and trust that we get them. We get what we ask for. Like, was it in the gospel one of these days, or was it last Sunday, that if we have the faith of a mustard seed, we can move mountains. I mean, it's the same as the whole thing of healing, that we have to trust in Lord healing, that it will happen. It's quite amazing. It's quite amazing how our faith can transform us, but we just have to allow to do it, and we just have to ask God for it. Ask God to help us and to guide us and to give us that whatever we need to do it. So it's important. It's important for us to do these, to make time, and then once the relationship with God deepens, when it really comes to fruition, then it becomes easier to pray. And that doesn't always mean that it is exciting to pray. I mean, as in emotionally exciting or experiential. For a lot of people, it isn't. Personally, for me, it mostly isn't. No, it isn't. It doesn't work like that. But it is to a certain extent. It becomes easier because it becomes deeper. And once a prayer becomes deeper, that desire that is there deep within us all the time, and we don't lose that easily unless we stop praying. That desire for closeness to God. Anyway, that maybe a little bit more on that some other time. As it is a fascinating subject, but I think it's a very hard thing to talk about. It's easy, like if you're in a situation where you talk one-to-one, where people come to talk to you. It could be confession, but it could be different as well. Talk to you in direction or whatever. Then you can kind of talk with the person and have a dialogue and see where they are at. It's very hard to talk about prayer, I think, out of a direct context. But prayer obviously is the life source of our souls. So it's very important and it's very deep, and it really should be the rock of our lives. So there you go. I think that would be enough for today. I think we're just going to play another song at the end, just to kind of fill the hour. So that's what happens when you talk about one thing and you get a question about the Angelus. You see the discussion kind of moves. But anyway, I hope it made a little bit sense. But like I said, I find it very hard to talk about on this medium in this way. But prayer is something that is very deep and very personal, and that's the way it should be. So thank you very much for listening to the show, and we just finish off with the song No Longer Slaves from Bethel Music.
You are